Welcome to the Enlight Life Podcast with Alexandra Cousins. Together we'll demystify disease and the debates around health, empowering you toward real regeneration and a life of vibrant vitality.
So welcome to the Enlight Life Podcast. This is a very special edition. We are here at this Congress in Bali for longevity and regenerative medicine. And really, I live here, but one of the main reasons why I came to the Congress is to meet Dr. Bill Lawrence and his wife, as well as Phil Micans. And Dr. Bill Lawrence and Phil Micans really are, for me, two icons of the world of longevity and regenerative health and regenerative medicine. And for those of you who follow me by now, you know I love to bring you the real information, the insider information, things that typically you don't get to hear, because these are not your typical rah-rah people that are out there shouting things from the rooftop. They are busy doing the real work. And so I'm extremely proud and delighted to be here with Dr. Bill Lawrence and Phil Micans and Liz. So thank you for being here. And this is really just it's an impromptu roundtable conversation where we wanted to bring you, again, things that you typically don't hear in the industry. So, before we hit record, we were speaking about the fact that in terms of longevity, and we've been speaking about this for the last couple of days, there's a lot of talk about longevity. There's a lot about, the various products and the rah-rah marketing. But then what you, Dr. Bill Lawrence, what you're doing is measurable. You give measurable results. And as you say, like nothing else. So can you maybe talk about, obviously our followers, they already know the peptide bioregulators. They understand the peptide bioregulators to a degree and their involvement in regeneration and longevity, but maybe to just briefly talk about, your research. We've already heard a podcast with you, but just, to kind of introduce this concept and how the testing, we're saying the telomere testing, the DNA testing, which everyone is again shouting from the rooftop, but it's not as straightforward as it seems. So can we maybe talk about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. My background is law and then science, and so in my world everything has to have either evidence or data in the science world and so forth. Otherwise it doesn't exist for me. And in addition, further, I don't pay any attention to animal studies. Naked mole rats are not human beings, okay, and neither are the fruit flies and so forth. And too often the pharmaceutical industry will use those as proof of success and so forth and so forth. Everything that I use, everything that I rely upon, and everything that Professor Cavinson did, at least later after the animal studies, was based on human beings. So when we talk about the results, these are results that have been achieved in human beings over a period of time. And I'm the administrator of two clinical studies, a telomere study and then the DNA methylation, or what we call the epigenetic study. We picked those two because they are probably the two primary longevity, health span biomarkers that have the most impact on human beings, both in terms of longevity and what their health is. And over the last 7 years, actually even longer than that, 7 years ago, we formally started the telomere study. And we've been able to show that with the peptide bioregulators, that over a period of several years, we can lengthen people's telomeres significantly. Vess at age, I think it was 64, 65, had telomeres a couple of years. They were shorter than her chronological age by a couple of years. In other words, some accelerated telomere loss. About 2 years later, at 60, maybe 5 or so, her telomeres were equivalent to a 33-year-old. Now, what does that mean? When we have longer telomeres, we have more cell replication. And if we have cell replication, we have life. Because without cell replication, life can't continue on. And the cell replication, though, has to be perfect. Okay? We can't have damaged cells in order to remain healthy. And so if we can lengthen people's telomeres, there's hundreds and hundreds of published clinical studies showing that people with longer telomeres live longer and have less health issues. So that was the telomere segment of this. And then about 4 years ago, Professor Cousins and I talked, and we decided that we would use a second test in terms of longevity, and that would be what we call the epigenetics testing. And that epigenetic testing is about determining which genes that are related to longevity are turned on at any given time and which genes that inhibit longevity are turned off. And what we discovered, and Professor Cousins already knew this, he had written about this 10, 15 years ago, but there hadn't been any real testing done outside of Russia on human beings. And what we were able to do is use the peptide bioregulators to actually turn on genes that support longevity and turn off genes that inhibit longevity. And we've been doing that for 4 years now very successfully. And we have before and after labs on all of this. There's about 150 people now in the clinical studies, 124 of them in the grouping that I just presented at the conference here where we had the data and so forth. So we can successfully change people's biological age. And as I mentioned in the conference, that term of biological age is so broad. It's better to say we can change certain biomarkers that relate to biological age, because the biological age concept is so many things in a human being. But these two biomarkers are probably the two most important. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are incredibly impressive, and I wonder, and having, of course, experienced myself the benefits and seen it over and over with clients, how quickly we can respond with the bioregulators. And I'd like to ask the question, why are so many people kind of, and especially in the world of medicine, almost against the peptide bioregulators and against wanting to hear that there's 40 years of studies from Russia?
I probably will answer that for you, Alex, if I may. And I think it comes down to vested interests and dogma. Most people, whatever they do in life, they do. And most people are adverse to change, whether they like it or not. And a lot of, how should we call them, mainstream doctors, they worry about their insurance, they worry about their license, they worry about their livelihood, they worry even about their liberty, perhaps. So they won't want to detour from what the book tells them. And so when a new thing comes along like this, we had a case recently where a Canadian client who had some thyroid issues had started on the thyroid bioregulator, and it was only a matter of weeks when she went for a blood test, etc., and suddenly all her parameters had normalized. And her endocrinologist apparently said to her, "My goodness me, what a change, this is all looking good. What on earth have you been doing?" And she said, "Well, I've been using these peptides." To which apparently her response was, "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I was you." So there you are, you see. You can call it ignorance if you want to, that might be another matter. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. Whether we like it or not. I mean, I remember that George Bush Sr. many years ago got lambasted for saying trickle-down economics, but it was probably a moment of truth. And I think by the same consequence, we have trickle-down medicine as well.
Absolutely.
There's another aspect to this as well. As an attorney, okay, I feel empathy for the conventional physicians and so forth, because they have their state licensing guidelines as to what they can and cannot do. And so if you're in a situation where, say, a conventional physician would like to step outside of those guidelines because he or she sees something with other patients or whatever that really works, the problem is if the patient doesn't get well or actually gets worse and dies, the attorney for the family is going to sue the doctor on the basis that the doctor didn't stay within the guidelines. And so doctors are really constrained in many ways, even when they want to go outside. And of course we saw this with the ivermectin and the whole COVID thing, where doctors wanted to use ivermectin and other things, But if they did, they could lose their license. Also, if there was a negative results, they could have been sued. So it's a real problem for the doctors.
It is, and as we sort of said off camera a lot of times, it makes it so tricky to get people well and to get people the real tools, or even just the real tools for longevity, not the marketing gimmicks, because of the current situation sort of in this industry. Another point that I wanted to touch upon, I really feel in today's social media world, what is marketed heavily is the idea that longevity and age reversal looks like someone who's basically had a lot of surgery and a six-pack, and as long as your skin's tight and you've got a six-pack and you're getting your 120 or 150 grams of protein a day, then you've got it. And those are kind of like the check marks, and then maybe we also throw a sloppy hormone therapy on top of it, and it's like, boom, we're done, right? Like, maybe let's take a bit of NMN maybe, and actually while we're at it, a bit of NAD plus, and we've made it. And what we've seen, and certainly with the studies that you've brought out, and this the data, the hardcore data, where you're not part of that sort of movement, but you're showing that with hardcore data, you don't need any of that, and that longevity is far deeper than sort of these surface measurements.
Do we think that bodybuilders and extreme athletes live longer than the average in the population, or shorter? It's shorter. And so, this public perception that you have to look like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, I don't know if that's good examples or not, but you know what I mean. And the way I always look at it is, we're talking about hopefully extreme longevity with also good health. We could call it optimum health if we want. And I always maintain that my goal for the very long term is to remain lucid, agile, independent. Because if you have actually those three things throughout your life, you have a life.
Absolutely.
You can drive the car, you can visit places, you can speak to people. Now, I'm not looking to run a 4-minute mile any day soon, but as long as I can get about and do the things I want to do, then I've got a life. So different folks, different strokes. I appreciate that. Some people want to look fantastic, have big hair or whatever it is. Great, fine, off you go, good luck. But for me, anti-aging longevity is more fundamental, more basic than that.
And I guess the work that you've been doing really demonstrates the fact that longevity is about, ultimately, in numbers, are you regenerating on a telomere level, on a DNA level? And I guess the other point that I wanted to bring in, which kind of ties in with this, deception of looks, which we are all bombarded with, and that by no means means health. And what really sort of, threw a light, opened a light for me, was when you showed this one elite athlete, who at 32 had the telomeres of whatever, a 50-plus-year-old.
56, yes.
Yes, and so, here was a woman, absolutely gorgeous, in her prime, super fit, so this perfect picture that we tend to propagate and that we tend to buy into, and that actually she didn't have a great prognosis until she went and did the peptide bioregulator therapy, and then actually her age was reversed. So how what are your words, or in your words, to sort of demystify these concepts for people, which I think also for a lot of people are not just deceptive, but also almost, oh well, I'll never look like that. Whereas I find what your message, your teachings, what you're doing is actually achievable for everyone ultimately, right? Or at least for those who desire it, and we're saying
for those who will make the effort.
Absolutely, because it's still, of course, it is an effort, and it is a shift in consciousness,
Yes.
right? But it's achievable, and much more achievable than, looking like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, which, is not achievable for everyone. So yeah, what would you like to add, for people that are listening to this?
Sometimes I think of it in terms of you have an older house and you've decided to sell this older house. And so you start doing things like repainting, fixing up this and that and so forth, planting a few more trees and so forth. But you don't go in and change out, the entire electrical system. You don't go in and look at the foundation and fix things that need to be fixed there. And so the cosmetic kinds of things, which are nice for people, and so forth, give us a nice appearance. But the house is still basically the older house, okay? So what we do is we start working at the cellular level. And there's a term that's thrown around a lot in the world of science called cellular reprogramming. It's used a lot. No one actually does it, at least they don't have any proof of it. We have proof with the peptide bioregulators that they operate at the cellular level. They reorganize cells. They're signaling, what we call signaling devices, that when you reorganize cells at this point, what you end up with is improvement in the tissues, because the cells make up all the tissues. We call it tissue rejuvenation. And when you rejuvenate tissue, you then rebuild the house completely. That's called organ regeneration. So what the peptides are ultimately doing through those steps is changing the composition of your organs, and eventually the entire system. So it's not just liver, heart, and so forth, but it's the central nervous system, it's the brain and so forth that changes. And as a result, you have a house that not only maybe looks good because it's doing these other things, there's nothing wrong with that. You want to reduce the wrinkles and so forth, that's fine. But you also need to deal with the core. So my goal is, I don't care so much how many wrinkles I have, but I want to be 110. And if I got a few wrinkles along the way, I'm just fine with that.
Yeah, and I fully agree with the message of, we could potentially take care of those as well. Thank goodness that there are all these wonderful techniques. But ultimately, we mustn't be blinded by what looks like rejuvenation, because ultimately rejuvenation, it's measurable on paper. That is what we're saying.
There was also, Professor Cabenson also had a study, it's a very famous picture of the Russian gymnast girls who won the gold medal in London a few years ago. And of course there are these 20-something-year-old girls, at peak fitness, just won a gold medal, for God's sake, in gymnastics, and when they tested their telomeres coming back, they were all in their 40s, if I remember them right,
yeah.
Bill. And which was shocking to everybody. But it's also an indication, of course, what preparation had they made to be the top of their game, extreme exercise and all the rest of it. So thankfully they corrected their telomeres within, I think, weeks, back to their normal or near normal chronological age. So the good news is it can be fixed, but it's just an indicator. Again, getting back to your point, they look fabulous on the outside, but on the inside there was some bad stuff going on.
Yes.
Revisiting the house metaphor, across the street from where Vess and I live, about 2 years or so ago, these people put their house up for sale, and they painted, added some porches and so forth, sold it at a very nice price. Then we noticed for maybe 3 or 4 months after that, construction crews kept showing up, and they were doing tremendous amount of rebuilding and so forth that had been neglected, but it looked good on the outside. I think that's probably what we're talking about here. It's great to do both, but if I had to choose between one, I want to be, biologically, I want to be as healthy as I can be. But that also ties into that bridge concept that I talk about when I'm presenting, and that is, the peptides are not isn't going to fix you for life. Okay, they're not the end point. What they are is an opportunity to reset. telomeres, epigenetics, and so forth, as well as now, as I talked about, we actually have the ability to assess an epigenetic age of various organs, 11 different organs, liver, heart, brain, and so forth, to reset all of those. But ultimately, what we need to do is stay as healthy as we can for the next, I use arbitrarily kind of a 10-year period. A 10-year period crossing what I call the bridge, which means that the things that are being worked on right now in the world of science, the things that will be coming down the pike in the next few years, robotics, various other interventions. If we stay healthy, we will be able to take advantage of those things. And I think that the world of science and medicine 10 years from now is going to look pretty different than it is today. But we have to stay healthy in order to be the recipient of those benefits, because I think at that point we get to leverage potentially that to another 20 years or so. So I'm 78 now. If I stay healthy, and I am very healthy, Vess is very healthy, we stay healthy, and I'll be 88, okay? I think at that point I can go to 110 or 120, and like you were saying, Phil, I want to be able to be lucid and active and so forth. That's my goal. If I have 100,000 wrinkles, I don't care. I'm still alive.
Can I add something to that, if I may? And that is, yes, that's excellent advice. And I'd also say you still have to be conscious and aware, because those technologies, as they come down the pipeline, will first be available to those who are looking for them. That if you're waiting for the mainstream medicine and the doctor at the end of your block to know about it, add another 20 or 30 years onto that, right? So this is why people like yourself, who are interested, who are informing folks, whether we like it or not, we've got to go to those sources that are genuinely interested and conscious of this. So yes, Bill's absolutely correct in saying that, these technologies enable us to be able to see future technologies with all hope, but we've also got to stay committed to being active and conscious and educated.
Absolutely. And so let's maybe wrap up this part of the conversation with, I think very few understand the concept of regenerative living, regenerative practices, because there's still the running concept, the running consciousness is, I have a condition, I have a symptom, and what can I do to fix this? What can you do to fix it? Like, what can you give me?
Sure.
Whereas what you're doing, what you're saying is, first of all, you're not dealing even with conditions. You're dealing, for the most part, really with people who are already in good health or in relatively good health. And you are then optimizing, elevating, or bringing rejuvenation, regeneration on an organ and system level, glandular level, so that the body operates the way that it used to operate when all of these systems were optimized, when peptide saturation was at optimum, etc. And I'm fascinated by, because I've been drumming this concept of regenerative living into people, and I'm always fascinated how even my followers, they still don't 100% get it and have made that shift.
You've got to see it. I always say the optimal health pyramid. And you can do a lot of stuff at the top of if you want to do stem cells all day long, then you can. That's maybe the top of the pyramid. But if you're not doing the basic, if you're eating McDonald's and drinking beer every day, you don't really think the stuff at the top's going to fix all the crumbling stuff at the bottom. So you've got to look at everything holistically. And, Bill knows all too well. If you take the pineal peptides and so on, the other programs that Bill has introduced, and you're extending or helping to extend your telomeres, but at the same time you're under a lot of stress. You're countering one with the other. You've got to get rid of the stress as well. And I also point this out. This is a little ditty that I tell people. Essentially, these short chain peptides in foods act as gene switches, individualized gene switches. And in some cases they activate, in some cases they silence. You could think of it as an adaptogen, as trying to keep things within the optimal parameter. But let's take the thyroid. I always take the thyroid as the example. So it gives instructions. It's a bit like the gaffer, if that's the right word to use, I think, so on the building site, if he's there and says, right, we're going to build a house today, right? Great. So think of that as the genes saying, I've got the instructions, I've got the blueprints. But if the other guys aren't there, the materials aren't there. So if there isn't enough vitamins, minerals, iodine, whatever the case may be, there's nothing to be built. Mm-hmm. So again, the peptides is a wonderful discovery about how the epigenetics of food instructions in food work, but we still need the materials as well.
Right.
And when we've got the materials and we've got the blueprints and the workmen, guess what? We build a house.
Mm-hmm. So what would be your words of wisdom for people to make that shift in consciousness and to really understand the power of regenerative medicine and how that power is really fully in our hands at this point? It's no longer something, or it would be nice if that existed, which I think still people, haven't grasped. It's here. It's in our hands.
Mm-hmm. I think the first step is a realization that if they rely on the conventional medical world to keep them healthy, it doesn't work. That's unfortunately the case in America. We have the unhealthiest group of people on the planet, unfortunately followed in second place, I think, by the Brits. And it comes a lot down to our diet and stress and so forth and so forth. And the conventional medical world doesn't know how to address staying healthy. They are good at certain aspects of fixing medical problems like orthopedics and things of that nature and so forth. But for general health, they really aren't very effective. So you have to become, in a sense, your own doctor at this point. And you have to start doing the research. And there's material out there, biohackers, podcasters, and so forth. That's where you're going to find the cutting edge information. So you have to make a decision that I'm responsible for my health, okay? And there isn't a doctor that's going to fix me. There's not some person out there that's going to fix me. I've got to be responsible, and that means I've got to devote a certain amount of time, money, and energy to learning how to be a good doctor for myself. And then accessing everything that's available, because there's a huge amount of information out there as to how you can be healthy for an extended period of time. And the peptides are one part of that, but you've got to address everything else. The foundation of everything, notwithstanding the peptides, is diet, a clean diet. And a clean diet is different than the food pyramid that they have in America, for instance. That thing is really messed up. And exercise, movement. Okay? Those two are the foundation. You can take all the peptides in the world and all of the vitamins and the supplements and the nutraceuticals and so forth, but if, as Phil was saying, if you're dining at McDonald's and so forth and jamming the French fries down your throat, you're not going to make much progress.
Right.
So I would say you got to become your own physician, basically, and take the responsibility.
Yeah, and that, of course, for many is a huge ask. But I feel that is really the foundational shift in consciousness that needs to happen. And I'd love to hear about your concierge service that you offer. Also because...
Can I just add a point to what Bill said? Sorry, Alex.
Yes.
I'm sure we'll be fascinated to hear what Bill does, but just to add a point to that about taking care. How many people, let's say you want to buy a new car, right? Do you walk into the first showroom you see and say, I want a car, sell me a car, and just whatever they sell, whatever they recommend you buy? I don't think most people buy a new car like that. You might look around, you might read something about cars, you might just visit several dealerships, go online, you might has got a car that you're interested in, ask them what it's like, and eventually you'll whittle it down to a few models and make your choices. And yet, when people fall ill, or start to feel some kind of degeneration, they walk into the temple and the high priestess or priest wearing the white coat says, you do that, and they don't question it at all. And yet it comes back to that responsibility. And whatever you do in life, whether you're an attorney or a builder or, I don't know, a taxi driver, you've still got to learn about health.
And Alec, you have the perfect history of that.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you went down that road a long time, the white jackets and so forth, you weren't getting anywhere, and then at some point you thought enough of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess I feel for people, because that's where I come from the Swiss clinics, where really we tend to think that, okay, if I go to, for some it's going to be the Swiss clinic, for others, another, but if I go to the top of the top, of course I'm going to get my answers.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we're just not there yet, and we can all speculate why, and we can have our theories, but the point is we're not there yet. And so, as you say, we need to be I feel at least aware of the fact that the real gems are just not out there. You have to really dig for them. You have to be a conscious consumer in terms of what advice do you take. And if I can throw in there for those listening is, don't ever take no for an answer, or that is not possible. It's like, I feel we live in a reality nowadays where pretty much anything is possible health-wise. Even if you're hanging by the fingernail.
Impossible is a ridiculous word. I'm reminded that some journalist wrote several weeks before the Wright brothers took flight that humans would not fly in 1,000,000 years. So Bill Falloon, who's the owner of one of the biggest companies in this business, which is called Life Extension, he sometimes lectures and he says to people, ladies and gentlemen, we're standing at Kitty Hawk, which was the place where the Wright brothers took flight. And I think that's where we are at the moment. There could be something really radical around the corner, and I don't think it's that far away. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. Well, and I would say, I know all of us agree here, and the users of the bioregulators, they're life changing. Every single client has come back to me and said, "What is this stuff,
That's
Alex?"
great,
Like
it's
this
remarkable as well.
It's remarkable, and then there's more, and there's more to come. So yes, to segue into your concierge program, because another point that we were discussing, several times, is real care takes time. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of, we don't, you were saying most, and I think most people know this, most physicians and even functional medicine practitioners and so forth, you go and see them. If you pay a lot of money, you get an hour with them, but that's it. These are not people that then go away and spend another 10, 15, 20 hours, weeks, months on your case, right? And I think that is what also a lot of consumers simply don't understand. Like, what is the difference between the run-of-the-mill, and I include in the run-of-the-mill, I include, places like the Mayo Clinic, etc. What can we expect from these places? Because the time that these practitioners, even top physicians, have for you as a client is really minimal. And then they sure don't have time to, while they're cooking dinner, to think about you, right?
Of course, when you go to those kind of places, what you're expecting as an individual, you're going to this great, vast repository of information. These people have spent their lives in this, and I didn't have the time because I was doing what I was doing. So I go to an expert, and this is the repository of information. But there is a sadness in, there are 3 words that you will not hear most doctors say, and that is, I don't know. Because of course they feel that if they say that to you, you lose confidence in them. But actually, I would suggest that a good doctor, being humble and understanding that he or she cannot know everything in this world, could say, well, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
And I would have a lot more trust in an individual that said that to me than the former.
And yet, for the reasons that Bill mentioned earlier, I get it, the system. So I think as a consumer, we need to look at the medical system in a way that, instead of, I feel, getting lost in conspiracy theories, which is easy to do, we need to look at it. It's not made for true top individualized care. It's an impossibility, right? And that's why I wanted to hear from you, Bill, how much care actually goes into your clients, into your programs, for people to kind of, get an idea of what does that look like.
We have run these studies, clinical studies now for 7 years for the telomere, about 4 into our 5th year on the epigenetic. We know what the results are. The results are, I shouldn't use the word phenomenal, but let's say impressive. Okay, the telomere over basically about a 2 to 3 year period of time will change people's telomere age by 20 years, 25 years. So if you're 50 years old, our goal, well, let me back up. We set goals when we have a participant in the clinical study. So let's say a person is 60 years old. Our goal for them is to reset their telomeres or lengthen their telomeres equivalent to about a 30 or 35-year-old. We can do that typically within 2 or 3 years. There's a fair amount of work that, of course, goes into that 2 or 3 years. With the epigenetics, it's not a age as such. It's a percentage reduction in mortality risk, because some really bright scientists at UCLA and other places, Dr. Stephen Horowitz, figured out that it's when we're looking at epigenetics, it's about mortality risk rather than an age number. And so what we do in the epigenetic part of it is, once we test for telomeres and epigenetics, we get the epigenetic information as to if their epigenetic age older than their chronological or younger. And typically most Americans, it's 3 or 4 or 5 years older. Doesn't sound like much, but if it's 3 years older, they have about a 35% increase mortality risk at this point. If it's, on the other hand, 3 years younger, they have about a 20% reduced risk at this point. So what we do is we want everyone to be at least 7 years less epigenetically than their chronological age. At that point, they have a 50% reduced mortality risk compared to their same age peers. There is nothing in the world of medicine, nothing in the world of science that can do that at this point. So what we do is we test people, we set up a protocol for them based on their test results, telomeres, epigenetics, and so forth. We also include, if they have any health issues, I'm not a treating physician, and so we don't treat these conditions, but we don't ignore them. So if they say have some heart history, either in the family or themselves, or they've got liver, et cetera, we will build in, because we have 22 of these natural oral peptides, we will build in peptides to address those issues. That then becomes their protocol for the next 12 months. And we then provide them with the peptides, we monitor them 12, 13 months down the road. We're in constant contact with them as well during that year, email mostly. We require everything to be by email, so we have a written record of it all. At 12 or 13 months, we retest people. And based on those retest results, which generally, in fact, almost always are positive. In other words, there's been some reduction in their biological age and epigenetically and so forth. We then adjust their program at that point for the next 12 months. We do the same thing, and typically people are in the program for 3 years, 4 years. And as I think I mentioned to you before, once we get close to or reach the results, and I would say 80% of the time we actually reach the goals, other times we get real close to them, then our preference is to say goodbye. We'll come back and see us in 3 or 4 years and we'll retest you. The problem is nobody wants to leave. They want to stay on some kind of so we have a minimum program that we'll run for them. But now we have our data, okay? We know what the results are, we have the evidence, we have hundreds and hundreds of lab reports and so forth before and after. And so we've decided to close out the clinical studies as such, because it's an enormous amount of work. We have presently about 150 people in the clinical study. And as we were talking about before, just to do the initial analysis, once we have their test results and some information from them, we'll put in at least 10 hours just formatting the protocol. And then the protocol gets sent out to them, then we get on a Zoom call and we can discuss the protocol and adjust it and so forth. And then we have a lot of follow-up stuff. So we're closing out the clinical studies. As I say, we have our data, and we have a separate track that we call a Concierge track. It's for people who are, right now in the clinical studies, it's primarily doctors. We restricted it to physicians and health providers a couple of years ago because it takes a lot less time to work with them because they have an understanding, they have some background. So now we're just going to run the Concierge track, and the Concierge track is for people who don't have that background but have a real passion for wanting to be healthy and live a long time. And so we have probably, I think, 25 people at this point in the Concierge program. It's a similar program to what we were using with the doctors, just a little more hand-holding that takes place over the period of 3 or 4 years. We charge a fee for that, and they also have to pay for the peptides as we go, and the retesting and so forth. So that's what we call the Concierge track.
That sounds, yeah, it's time intense, and I know the level of deep care and thoughtfulness that goes into this, because inevitably you have to be deeply involved. Can we mention the price of the program?
Certainly, it's $50,000. It covers the full 3 or 4 years, even longer, because as I say, they can stay on maintenance. There's no additional charge beyond that initial enrollment. And then I would say most people are on 3 or 4 peptides, maybe 5 peptides a month, $400 to $500 a month for the peptides. In the first retesting, about $1,000 to do all the retesting. That's the cost. And then the maintenance program is a couple $100 a month after that.
Which, if we look at the costs of surgeries and all the things that that people tend to throw. I mean, I often think even just cosmetics, superficial cosmetics, the money that goes in there, which, how much does it do? We don't really know.
Well, you could say, if you think health is expensive, wait until how much is disease?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, people start remortgaging their homes to get out of whatever hole they've just fallen into.
Yes,
right?
Without often, unfortunately, finding answers.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the other aspect of this is that while we can't guarantee, based on Professor Cavanson's 40 years of research, published studies and so forth, and what we've been doing in the United States, again, I don't want to guarantee it, but I would expect anyone who has reached these goals should have easily, at minimum, 10 years and probably 20 years or more of health. And what is that worth? When I was a tax attorney a long time ago in a prior career, I was doing mostly estate planning, wills and trusts and so forth. And so wealthy people would be referred to me to do the trust planning and so forth. And a number of them, people in their 80s, some in their 90s, some of them with health issues and so forth, would say things to me that the theme basically was, I would give away everything I own if I could get 10 more years.
Right, and 10 good years.
Yes, 10 good years. Oh yeah.
When I look at the two of you and how really youthful you are, and even just in your thinking, because that I find oftentimes with older people you can see there's like a hardening of thinking. I mean, that's where I say to my husband, okay, like I want to be like them.
I read a study once that said that with older folks, they were prepared to spend up to 50% of their disposable income on staying healthy, because at the end of the day, you've got on in life, you've done well in life. How many more cars do you want to own? How many more planes do you want to own? That's not what's important. What's important is that you have vitality and that you can interact with whoever you want to interact with.
Well, and that it feels good, from my own experience, having spent really from my teenage years until my 40s, just not feeling good in my body and going like, who wants to grow old if this is,
exactly.
And then changing that and going like, oh wow, this is amazing to feel incredible vitality in a body.
That is an attitude we have to change. Some public's perception is geriatric means decrepit. It doesn't actually. Any geriatrician will tell you the word geriatric only means one thing. It means being over 65. Doesn't mean anything else. But most people see that word as being someone who can't do anything, basically. Has to be taken care of. And of course, what that needs to shift, people need to say that people will be 90, will be 100. They'll be lucid, independent and agile. They won't be a burden on society. Indeed, they'll be contributing a lot, because I see it as a world, if we have older people who are fit, loose and agile, is that they will bring new intelligentsia and peace to this world.
I fully agree. I am ever more inspired by people like you, who are, really, to me, the forerunners of what's possible. And it's completely changed my view on aging. I look forward to getting older now, because I realize every year that I grow older, I can get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I can feel better, I can get better, I can get stronger.
Yeah.
And to me, that is really the power of the work with the peptide bioregulators. And maybe in closing, again, there's so much marketing about the NMM, NDNA, and NAD. I was mixing it with MDMA, NAD plus, and these various molecules, which are kind of always put out there as that's the thing.
I've seen that for 35 years in my career.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's gone on from resveratrol was the buzz. I'm not saying they're not decent molecules.
Yes.
I'm not saying they don't.
They
have
have their
roles to play.
place.
But there's, I've got a couple of stories, maybe off camera. But I would have more faith in NADH than in NAD. But there are certain people, I'm not going to mention names, who are very much promoting certain molecules, who have a vested interest in those molecules. So it's too much. Listen, I don't think they're bad things, and they could have roles, as I say, but they're not the be-all and end-all.
Right. And that's the point that we're trying to make here, for the consumers to be aware that if there's something that there's too much hype, be aware, because ultimately it's not the one molecule that's going to change your life. And yet the one thing that I would say that can radically transform your life when all the other pieces are in place is peptide bioregulator therapy. Mm-hmm. So that
But let me also put it in perspective, and just a reminder to your listeners. The peptides are a wonderful intervention. They're proven, there's evidence, data, and so forth. But they are the step to get us to the bridge, as I've talked about. The bridge is critical, because what's coming, hopefully, that bridge, there's now 700 sort of anti-aging foundations and operations going on investigating, potential anti-aging interventions. They're funded, the last number I heard was something like $10 billion of funding has gone into these things. And they're funded basically by billionaires and so forth who want to live a long life. It's a slow process. The research takes a long time. Cavinson started working on these in the 1970s, okay? The goal with these peptides are for Vess and I, Phil, so forth, yourself, stay as healthy as we can, so that in 10 years' time, some of these things will come to fruition, and we'll be able to use these things, to extend our life another 20 years. So when I was talking about people should be able to extend their life with the peptides 10 or 15 years or whatever, that gets you to the bridge. Yeah. And then hopefully across the bridge.
Personally, yes, I see the bridge concept. But in the meantime, I'm enjoying feeling great every single day.
Yes, of course.
That's kind of, it's almost in some ways genuinely what I'm more interested in and more fascinated by, especially after many years of not. And so it's like, great, if that bridge is there and whatever, is going to come. So let's maybe for a split second, spend a moment of fantasizing, what could that be? Like, what are we, right? What are we waiting for? And at the same time, don't stay waiting, because we've discussed some people, that's what they do.
Let's cut to the chase. What everyone really wants at the end of the day is to look and feel like they were 25 years old, right? That would, if you're talking about, you said, make it a moment of fantasy, so I did. That's what we all would like to do. If that was the ultimate goal. Can you imagine staying in that kind of, dare I call it, homeostasis? But of course, concurrently, we'd still be educating ourselves and having, that's what I say, the people who've been around 200 years or something would have immense intelligence, hopefully, and would also have immense experience. So they would be incredible people, wouldn't they?
For sure. I guess the moment of fantasy for me, because right now I can't even conceptualize more. Sure, yes, we all want to be, you know, when I was 25, that wasn't my greatest moment in life.
I'm talking about physically, and
sure.
Obviously what was going on around you at that time is a different thing.
Yes, well, even physically for me, it wasn't the greatest moment. But the question was more geared towards what potential intervention could we fathom coming in the next 10 years, right? Like that could then be do we have any idea? Because I don't.
Well, it comes down to, a lot of it will come down to cellular reprogramming, true cellular reprogramming, because that's where everything starts, is at the cells. That's where aging starts, is at the cell level. But the things that will become available, stem cells are currently the fad, okay? There's not a lot of evidence yet. There's hope, okay? And I look at things as, when I used to go to medical conferences, which I don't do very often anymore, because at those conferences, I hear speakers get up and they talk, and it's about either hope or hype, because a lot of them have an agenda underneath that they want to sell something. The core change has got to come at the cell level, and there's research going on to be able to change the signaling, you know, that goes on at the cell level. That'll be the real biggie as such. There are other things like robotics and so forth that are being worked on, and etc. But that's where I see the real change coming. Unfortunately, the research there, you know, we call it Yamanaka factors and so forth. That's a buzzword. Unfortunately, what's not talked about while they're working on it is that most of the animals died in the studies and so forth. So I would say pay attention to cellular reprogramming progress, because that's where the leap is going to be. Because then at that point, you're fixing the whole house.
That's a good point. My mentor was a guy called Ward Dean, Dr. Ward Dean. And Ward always think that the hypothalamus would be one of the key breakthroughs, because everyone forgets it's at the top of the tree. But there was a American-Japanese scientist who's quite well known. I can't think of his name, so please forgive me. He's got white hair, and he's often interviewed on many subjects, from what's going on in space to whatever. But I saw him once give an interview, and they said, what will be the biggest breakthrough in health? And I thought his answer was fantastic. He said, when we have intelligent toilets. Because when you think about it, whatever adaptation we need to do, imagine knowing every day what was going on in your body. So his concept being that whatever you put into the toilet would be analysed.
Sure.
Okay. So, but imagine that you could actually do every day, even you could do subtle changes and adaptations to keep you on the right path. So maybe understanding what's going on in our body every day, to me, could be an amazing thing.
For sure, which we are moving certainly more and more and more in that direction.
Yeah.
And even there, as we said, there's a lot of hype and hope and a lot of confusion. Because if we keep people confused, you know, that also, it makes money. So in closing, I would love to kind of bring it down to sort of, you know, real human terms, and like, what does your life, your daily life look like, besides, because of course you're not just having the enjoyment of the vitality that you are experiencing because of the peptides, but you do a lot of other things. And maybe if you can share, what do you feel are, you know, maybe your 5, 6, whatever top tips and takeaways for the listeners? You know, what are your kind of gems that you practice, that you sort of swear by?
For me, it's exercise, sleep. I think it's important for me to get like 8 hours of sleep. I try really hard to keep my stress at a low level. Exercise is important. I do some form of exercise every day. You know, we're ballroom dancers, so you know,
I loved learning that about you, that you are a long time
Yes.
ballroom dancers,
Yes,
and I
so-
think that does a lot, not just from a physical, but from the mental perspective.
Yes, as you know, the studies, show that ballroom dancing is the number one thing to prevent dementia or to ward it off.
Yeah.
And Alzheimer's runs heavily in my family, especially with the women. So I take a lot of ballroom dance lessons because the learning aspect is really important. And then Bill and I, dance all the time. And I think if you covered our faces and just looked out on the floor in a social setting, a ballroom setting, there would be no way to know that we're, our chronological ages.
Absolutely.
I mean, Bill, for example, will dance nonstop with just about every lady there. And so, you have that physical contact and, the spatial navigation and the music, all that is, really, really important. And then I do, a lot of other things, hyperbaric, ozone, etc. And then I think the first peptide I ever took would have been the one for the brain, because that's my big focus. I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want to end up in a nursing home. And of course, Bill keeps saying, you won't, that will never happen. And I feel, physically, probably as well as I did when I was, say, 25.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and certainly you have that youthfulness about you, and there's for me it's an energy thing, and I definitely see that with you both, that there's this energy of youthfulness, and where it's not about and on the other hand, I can see these completely smoothed out faces, and I think, okay, but there's a deadness, right? And I feel ultimately we are here to fully embody that, all the things that we can be, right? We're here to I like to say, we're here to fully express. How much expression can we bring into the world, and into how much life from inside can we flow into the outside? And that's what we're here to do. A bit like when we were children, right?
Yes.
Where everything was
Right.
just this pouring of life, and I certainly see this aliveness with you, and I love, yes, you say you're quiet, but there's like a playfulness about you and this energy of curiosity, and I think that is, really, really important. So
Yes.
thank you for kind of, bringing that infectious energy. And I'm thinking, okay, I haven't succeeded with ballroom dancing, but it's something on the list.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And you, Bill, what are your sort of, if you were to give away your top, not even secrets, but what do you feel is making all the difference in your life in terms of your youthfulness?
I would call it gratitude. Literally, when I wake up in the morning, every single morning, I am grateful, and I list things in my mind. I list 5 things every morning. I don't get out of bed until I finish that. The first one is I woke up, I'm breathing, I'm alive, I have another day. Okay. The second one typically is I'm healthy. And the third one, you advise with I have vests in my life or my work or both. The two kind of go together. I'm passionate about the work that I do. I hate that term work because for me it's not work. My work day starts at 9 in the morning and ends at midnight. And yet it's not work. I mean, I love every moment. I have to force myself at times to, and Bess knows this. I used to stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning, and then I realized how that's not the smartest thing to do. So I try and get to bed at midnight. And it doesn't feel like work at all. So I have great amount of gratitude for those things. And I think the gratitude of just being grateful to wake up and have a life. I had a professor a long time ago who said to the class, he said, I'd rather have the worst day of my life than not. And it took a moment for the class to understand, and everybody, Oh, yeah. Because he could deal with the worst day of his life if he's breathing. Okay, he has options at that point. So I call that gratitude. And the other part of it, there's a certain amount of luck, of course, that's involved in it. Because I've had several careers, and this last career, prompted pretty much by my father's death early, prompted me to shift out of a lot of things I was doing and get into the science medical world. And then the real luck part, I think, was knocking on Cavinson's door and his allowing us to come in and join them. I mean, that was just a stroke of fortune. An American, not even a scientist really at that point, American guy comes over and wants to see what we're doing. He could have said, no thanks, we don't have time for you. Because, you know, I was coming in as a raw, unknowledgeable person. I'd read about peptides, I'd read his clinical studies. But just the luck and the graciousness of Professor Cavinson to take us in. And I think it was maybe 6 months or 8 months later, we're in Lucerne, Switzerland to attend a medical conference that he's speaking at. And at this point I've done a couple of telomere tests, and I had some before afters and so forth, you know, but it hadn't gone any further than that. And at the lunch break, Cavinson said, oh, by the way, I want you to present to this group of scientists the telomere tests that you have. And I'm going, what? In other words, he opened the doors, okay, for me. So gratitude for him in my life, huge factor in my life. And just, I don't want to go there.
No, he was a genius.
Yeah,
No question of that.
He was a genius.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm actually so glad that we're having this moment, because I honestly, even though I didn't meet him, listening to so many of his lectures, I said the same thing to his wife. I said, your husband, he got it. Like, he was to me, a real human, right? Like, he was an amazing scientist. He was an amazing human being. And to me, that came through. And just this morning, I kind of had this epiphany, because I feel, just as I feel, you know, Professor Cavinson was an amazing human being, you know, I feel the same thing about you, Bill. And I feel the same, like, from the first time that we had a talk, I was like, you know what, this is a real freaking human, you know? And I love real humans. I really do. Because what are we doing here if
We're
not
sharing knowledge? It's not here for one-upmanship or competition. We cooperate and we share knowledge, and we will all prosper. We will all have enough, you know.
For sure.
So,
but and in fact, yesterday I actually was talking to my husband about this. You know, we were philosophizing, and I was like, you know, I feel in order, like, if we grasp the sacrality of life, and once we experience, because I grasped the sacrality of life, once I started feeling amazing in my body, it was like, wow, this is why people want to be alive. And I had, yes, a God experience. And in fact, I had a God epiphany, God experience when I took my first peptides 2 weeks in. And I felt the deep, heartfelt gratitude for Professor Cavinson in that moment. And
as I said in our last conference in England, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. Yeah, none of us arrived at what we know without learning the knowledge from people that went before us and the before them. And as Bill points out in his lectures, Cavinson had the advantage of working on the back of Pavlov, who was I know we all know about how Pavlov made the dog salivate, etc. But he was a member of the same institute in St. Petersburg, and I believe he was the man who discovered short-chain peptides originally. So, you know, again, standing on the shoulders of giants, this is how we progress.
yes. But I see it, for me, it's an act of gratitude towards whatever we want to call it, God, Goddess, all that is existence. But wow, I get to experience life, and every moment that I get to experience the beauty of life, the meetings, the humanity, the gratitude grows. And so I feel, especially as people who are here bringing health to others, if this is not the spirit with which we are working with, what are we doing? And that is the gripe that I have with the industry, because what is more, I don't care. With other industries, it's like, whatever. But with the health industry, health is our God-given right. And when I experience health and well-being, I feel the sacredness of life. And then I want to do good in the world.
It's the most important thing as well. The last slide I put up yesterday was, I just said, here's a reminder, folks. And it said, all of us can have thousands of problems in our life. But if we have a health problem, suddenly we have one. Right? And I also say that, when you get on an aircraft and they say, if the oxygen mask falls down, put yours on first before helping others. And I see that in the same light, because whoever we have in our life, or our loved ones, family, whatever, if we haven't got our health, how can we help them?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this beautiful discussion, and may this inspire. And really, of course, there's so much that was said in between the lines. So may you take away your empowerment, and that no matter where you're at, whether you are in the worst state of your health, where I once was, or whether you are doing okay, it doesn't matter. The point is, there is always hope. There's always so many things that you can do, but ultimately do it for yourself, because that is how you become a human being that becomes a true giver. And for me, that is what we're all here for. So thank you for
Alex,
joining
why
me
don't
here.
we say goodbye the barley way? What do you think?
Yes.
Everybody?
I love that.
Yes, that is the beautiful barley way. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
Welcome.
Yeah.